and welcome to another episode of the Ministry Coach Podcast, the number one podcast for anybody named Jeff and Kristen Lascola on the internet right now. I gotta stop you. You got something in your teeth.
I do?
No, I'm keeping it. We're rolling.
I just had Hershey Kisses.
Oh,
is that what it is?
No, you didn't.
Or is
get
it kale?
We're gonna be really married for a second.
Kale
here.
chip.
I think it was kale.
Okay.
Well, we have a fun show today.
Yeah, we're still in quarantine, so everyone's a little bit nutty, I feel like.
Yeah,
So
well, we started nutty, so
we
this
did.
made us more nutty.
Well, potato. But so we're super excited because we have a guest.
Yes.
Today.
Always fun to have a guest.
It is. I don't think we count as guests, so we like bringing in somebody. And this person, man, I was trying to think how long he's worked at North Coast Church. I know him because he works with me at North Coast. Chris, how long have you worked at North Coast Church? 6 years.
9
That's my
years.
guess. What?
9.
9?
Wow.
I guessed 6, so I was way off. So yeah, he's worked at North Coast Church with me for 9 years, and he started out in our 11-12 ministry, which is our 11th and 12th graders at our main campus, which is in Vista, our Vista campus, and recently has had a little role change in jumping from 11th and 12th grade to our young adult ministry. So he's been doing that for, gosh, what now, like, I'm going to botch this too, so I probably shouldn't even guess. I'm going to guess 6 months.
Hey, yeah, just about 8. That's right.
Yes. Okay. So, and not only that, but this is Christopher Hilken at North Coast Church, and he is a little bit of our, can I call you our golden child of North Coast? He's not a child. Although
But he is golden.
He has a youthful glow, to be sure. But he is in kind of a unique position at our church because, yes, he is a student ministries pastor. And I think that Chris would probably agree that's his number one role. But he is also on our speaking staff. So our teaching staff rotates between 3 of our senior pastors, Larry Osborne, Chris Brown, and now, for the first time in a long time, adding in a 3rd speaker. So for sure, one of Chris's A games is teaching. I mean, some of his sermons, you can check them out at northcoastchurch.com, but another one of his A games is culture setting. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, that in student ministries and ministry in general, how do we become culture setters, and what are some of the keys going in to look for, to know, and to implement? So Chris, welcome. Should we call you Chris or Christopher?
Yeah, it's whatever way. At North Coast, it's Christopher, just to not get confused with Chris Brown, but
Yeah.
I couldn't care less.
Cool. So, all right, you have people like on the inside at North Coast kind of joke like that you've created like a cult. And I think what they mean by that is like what you've created in your ministry, you definitely have a specific culture for 11-12 or a specific culture for young adults, the ministry that you're doing now. So walk us through, like, what is your mindset when you're going in to a ministry, and as the leader, as the culture setter, what are those keys that you're hoping to implement?
Yeah, it started when I was teaching at Hume Lake one year and watching the different churches worship different ways, but also when you saw them either playing like during recreation or something else like that, you watched this weird thing happen where they all became this little like miniature version of their leader. And some groups would all be very expressive in worship, and certainly there's a denominational thing that happens there, but then there's other groups that would sit with their arms crossed, and you could basically predict what the students were going to be like by watching what their leader was like. And sometimes their leader being their pastor or their lead pastor, he was technically in charge, but you knew that someone else actually led them, that they had the power to set and to shift culture. And so I thought to myself, there's got to be something to this. So that kind of led me down this trail of figuring out what is culture, what does it do, what does it not do, and then how do you define it? And then what if you find yourself in a position where you need to change it or to alter it, or in some ways, to be frank, you need to improve it. So I just said from day one, kind of walking into 11, 12, which again was 9 years ago now, and then walking into Jordan, their culture are the things that the leader sets on what is appropriate, on what is inappropriate, on what you praise and who you give celebrity to. And at its core, what you do, every time you put someone on a platform, every time you call on someone, every time you put out a piece of an announcement, or when you talk on stage, or the vernacular that you use in a sermon, if you're not careful, you don't understand that you're setting culture all the time. And you might think harmlessly that that was just a one-off sermon, or if you're not paying due diligence to the way that you talk and think and express and associate with people around you, you're going to set competing cultural guidelines for your students who are all looking up to you, saying, teach us what it means to be a part of this ministry. And so you have people who have great initiative or great intentions, but they've got bad culture and it eats them alive. If you don't have your culture aligning with your vision, culture eats vision for breakfast. Vision can be great. It can be well thought out. It can be Patrick Lencioni and Andy Stanley to death. But if you as a leader don't have culture in place to implement the change or implement the vision, too often I watch people go, here's who I want to be. And I go, but bro, you're not that. Or listen, lady, you got to be that first if you want them to do those things. So that's kind of my fascination with culture. And that's how important I think it is. And I don't think it can be overstated on how much we should be talking about in ministries. What is culture and how can we change it in a way that's productive and effective, that promotes our vision rather than it's going to be in competition with our vision. So I would say as a whole, that's kind of what culture is made up of. What do I allow?
So would you say, like as a little soundbite, would you say that you view culture as the vehicle to implement your vision? Like it's what gets your vision from point A to point B?
Yeah, it's a little bit of there's like that old saying of like the fish in water, where there's like a fish swimming and then another fish says, hey, how's the water today? And the first fish says, what's water? Because they're just in it so much. And so sometimes whether it's a current or it's the wrong temperature or whatever, I wouldn't say that culture. Yeah, I guess so. Culture is kind of it's the vehicle, but it's also like the unspoken police that can step in at any point and stop what you're trying to do, or it can be kind of like a rocket and boost you to what you're trying to do, but it's not neutral. Culture isn't neutral. It's either supporting the vision that you want or it's killing the vision that you want. So it almost acts as like a steroid or like a suppressant in what you're trying to get accomplished. So you can cast your vision, and without culture in its right position, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle or fighting against the current. So I think that's the power that culture has in vision casting.
So you come in, because I remember when you came on staff 9 years ago, and somebody else was in charge, and you were more of like in an intern or director role, associate role to that person. And so when you first started, you were not responsible for the culture. So, and now your ministry, the ministries that you lead have a very, like you said, very specific culture, flavor, a very specific brand. So can you maybe elaborate on like, what are those things like when you came into 11, 12, 9 years ago, and now the reins are in your hand and it's your ministry? What did you see as like cultural pillars that you were like, I'm going to build this into my ministry. I'm going to build this kind of attitude, this kind of flavor, this kind of perspective. Like, what were those things that were specifically important to you coming in?
Yeah. So one of the big things for me, especially working with 11th and 12th graders, is, I mean, you feel the same way. You've been doing ministry long enough. I would expect, in terms of if a student came up and said, I've got a really hard thing that I want to talk about, you basically can break it down into one of 7 things, and you have to massage it a little bit, but almost every single issue that anyone has can be broken down in one of these small things. And at the core of all those small things, I think for a high schooler, there was this underlying foundation of insecurity. And so what I found is when someone's insecure, they can't develop community well. When someone's insecure, they're not going to be willing to listen to hard truth. When someone's insecure, they don't want to be challenged. When someone's insecure, they're going to puff up and they're going to whether it be violence or aggression or verbal aggression or whatever it is, that's going to be more of that, right? It's like short man syndrome. And so when someone feels insecure, no matter how hard you're trying to fight as a ministry lead, you're going to get a lot of your student leaders or your students in positions of power and influence that are not going to be supportive of you because they're too busy having their own internal sizing contest with other people. And so one of my specific things that I wanted to create was, how do we abolish the insecurities that we might accidentally be creating? And so that was really a lot of my intention. So day one, we don't make fun of people. So if we're going to shoot a video and someone's being dumb, when they're done with it, awesome video, right? When someone, you can even ask people from those years or even up to now. If you're in 11, 12 and a guy's trying to lift something and he's not able to do it, if someone opens their mouth and says the phrase like, oh my gosh, you're weak, right? Or if a girl comes in and whatever it might be, and someone makes some derogatory comment towards her or laughs at her for the way that she's dressed, the way that she acts, something like that, what you'll find is a little bit kind of like a wolf pack acts. When a wolf is out of line, they kind of go after them. And that's when you know your culture is strong, when the pack starts to take care of itself. When that weird or rude thing is said and everyone just kind of goes, like that pause moment of, did you just say that out loud? Now, you go over to the local high schools or whatever, and it's totally par for the course. But I wanted to create a space where emasculation and defeminization and mockery and the phrase, go away, or I don't want you to be here, that was going to be kind of the cultural F word, right? Like we don't talk like that. We don't do those kind of things. So you got to find those moments. So that's what I do specifically early on, is finding the people who are curators of the moments of bullying or that were killing insecurity. And I made sure that my flock knew that the pastor, the shepherd, when that happened, I was going to step in, and then they all kind of followed suit. But what expect, you have to inspect. So it was such an uphill battle at first, because every time it happened, hey, that's not who we are. That was just that phrase we said over and over again. That's not who we are. I get it. That's a completely appropriate thing to say outside these walls, but inside these walls, that's not who we are. When you're getting up on stage and every time I welcome someone, look, I know a lot of you guys here you're coming to church all the time. Some of you guys come from different sexual orientations. You have all these things, but when you're inside these walls, you're part of our family. You are always going to be welcome here. Now, there's some weeks where there's 8 students there. When I first started, there was 30 students in 11, 12. So I knew for sure there were some weekends or some services where there were no non-believers in the room. But I knew that if I said that enough, and if I kept with that vernacular long enough, that people would start going, I can bring my friend who's different than me. I can bring my friend who's a non-believer, because Chris says every week that they're welcome here. He makes it a point. So those are some of the cultural vernacular things that specifically right away I said, this is not what we're going to do. Sometimes you got to take that tribal chieftain or that powerful student leader and you got to knock them down a peg. Or for us, it was they didn't go on our missions trip because they were so countercultural to what we were trying to do, that I wanted people to know we're really serious about this thing. We want you to feel welcome and loved, because if the truth of the gospel is going to get across from me to you, I can't have it hopping over 8 levels of insecurity and a lack of self-confidence for it to get there. You have to feel safe. You have to feel welcome. You have to feel home. And if you don't, I can't expect the gospel to flourish or our ministry to flourish, or that we're going to invite anyone new. So that's a specific thing that we curbed and killed almost immediately as soon as I took the reins.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me like of that whole idea of like people can't hear the gospel over their growling stomach. So like you meet their physical needs and then you share the gospel with them. And I think you hit the nail on the head with like, well, what is a high schooler's, because you worked with 11, 12 and now are young adults, but especially in that high school world, like what is their, like you identified their number one need is security, because they're like hyper self-aware. They're so self-conscious. And to be honest, you know, I would have loved to have a high school pastor like you when I was growing up, because I refused to go to youth group because of my insecurity. And I remember my mom would drop me off and I'd kind of like wait outside. And if I did not see one person I knew, I would just bail. Like I wouldn't even go in because I was like, oh man, like, what are they going to think of me? Who am I going to sit with? Like it didn't feel safe. It felt just like another high school. So like where you're saying, like we're taking what's going on at high school and what makes you insecure all day long and what like pulls on your fears all day long. We're going to just abolish that and squash that in this place and make that safe. And that's huge. And I guess I want you to walk me through a couple more of those other than the, like, this is a atmosphere of positivity and of encouragement and support, and we are for you, and like people are catching on to that. I want to hear if there's more of those. And also, like, you're such a strong culture setter. Is it like, are you like the culture sheriff, in town on a Wednesday night or on a program night? Or like, what has been that trickle effect now to where it's like, you aren't, like, who is joining you and how did that ripple effect happen? Like because you could set the culture, but you can't implement it, especially at your size, because you grew 11, 12, what was there, like 300 kids coming or something, like you can't be, hey, we don't talk negative around here. Wait, hey, like, so how did that spread to the other influencers in the group?
Yeah, I knew that if you wanted to create a culture like that, you had to make sure that the culture setters and you had FaceTime all the time. So like our student leadership meetings take place every single week in 11-12. So every single week at 12:37 p.m. after our second service, I met with every one of our student leaders. In that room, by the end of it, we had over 300 students coming on a weekend, which means our leadership team, whatever word you want to call it, I don't think it's a perfect word for it, would be about 70 or 80 every week. And if you get 70 or 80 of your core on the same page, and whatever percentage that is, on the first week I was there, the second week I started our leadership program. That was one of my first tasks coming into 11-12. And that week, 30 students coming in 11-12, and we had 26 at our first leadership meeting. And so it was just week after week walking through. I created a list of here is who we're going to be. And then we do examples, and they would know it, and they would by the time we're done, when I start it, they'd be able to finish it, right? Like, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It was so second nature to them that they were able to recite it. Now, after that class keeps moving on, they are going to begin to teach it. That junior class and the senior class, it's implemented in the back of their head. Then when the new junior class comes in, the people they look up to, the seniors, it's so imprinted in them, the juniors adopt it. And sometimes they might not even have the language for it. They just know what it is. And now after 9 years, that process has continued with such rigorous focus on that and making sure that our staff and our leaders are on the same page, that now I have one meeting at the beginning of the year where I say, here's our culture, and then I don't touch it again. Right?
Really?
Don't touch it again. Yeah. No, because they self-police now, and they don't police. You're not going to see people walking around going, oh, you were negative. But what's the currency of their culture? It's attention, it's focus, it's question asking. So if you're going to be negative, people just kind of go, they just stop talking to you, and so you catch it really quick, and you go like, every time I'm negative, everyone shuts down around me. So unless if you've got a really low EQ, you've got something else going on, you might never catch it. And that's okay, because we want to be there and we want to love you anyway. But there are so many things to what you're talking about. What are some of those other things that plays into it? The currency of the leader is his time. The currency of a leader is her time. And too often we are like, this is just being honest, right? Year 2 or year 3, or the first year that I was in 11-12 as the leader, I was drawn to a lot of the students who were like me. But if I was in my own high school group, I was probably going to be the most countercultural person in my high school group, because I was the guy who wanted to push the envelope. I was the guy who was a little bit more of the influencer, but also I could pick on people and do that kind of stuff. Well, there were students then when I first took over that were a lot like that. And I spent a lot of time with them because I got along well with them. But then I watched the culture shift and everyone go, okay, so I'll make up their names. Mark and Steve, he spends a lot of time with Mark and Steve, and here's how they act. And then I watched the whole culture become Mark and Steven-esque. And I went, oh my goodness, I'm shooting my own culture in the foot by spending time with people who are countercultural because I get along with them well. So the currency of time too, of going, who creates and sets and manifests and demonstrates our culture the best. I have to make sure that the rest of the flock sees that that's what gets your attention. Now, at some ways you go, well, isn't that manipulative? And I think it's, in some ways, it's just using your influence for good rather than for evil. I don't want to necessarily always go to who I'm drawn to, but who am I going to move towards strategically to say, this is who we're like. It's the celebrity piece. Who gets the celebrity of 1112? When it comes to doing announcements or drawing raffle tickets, I have to make sure it's people that I go, if the whole culture started to become like you, would I be okay with it? That's a litmus test I put everyone through before I put them up on a stage. And if the answer is no, you'll find some very influential ASB presidents of schools that sit in the rows in our ministry week after week, and we don't even use them. Because if we give them position, they are going to create a tidal wave against what we're trying to do. So we're really careful with that. You have to guard the gate strategically to understand, what am I teaching my culture? What am I conditioning them to become by where I spend my time and where I place my influence?
So, and I've heard you talk about this before, and I know that that positive atmosphere is huge, and it really draws people in. I mean, like, we could never deny that we all want to walk into a group of our biggest fans, right? And I think that's what you've created with your leader.
I'm still looking to find that group. I haven't found it.
I struggle hard with sarcasm, and so
I don't.
Sometimes I wonder if I would be able to even make it in 1112. And sometimes I show that as like my love language. Like, I'll make fun of you only if I like you, you know. But I know with high schoolers especially, I think it's a little more delicate. But other than that atmosphere of encouragement and positivity, would you say that when you came in 9 years ago, there was like anything else that you were really going to hone in on? Like, I've heard you talk before about like setting this culture of like, oh, everyone brings a journal to write notes with, or everyone has their Bible and everyone has a pen and is ready to treat this as a classroom and learn something. So are there other like hallmarks that you feel like you were able to drip in?
Yeah, I think even early on, we were really careful to promote bringing people rather than just inviting them. Because I realized when you started saying like, hey guys, make sure you invite your friends, that was kind of like in one ear, not the other. But then we started platforming people who were bringers, and we said, hey, like, you know, cool, you brought this many people. Or if people are showing up, then at Joshua team, or that's our leadership team meeting, at that I would bring them forward and I would just say, hey, tell me why it was so important for you to bring them today. Then they get to share their heart for the gospel. They get to share their heart for seeing people know Jesus. And then you platform that and you showed that. So I think outside of the encouragement thing, there are I think the way that especially high schoolers, maybe junior hires, I haven't gotten to spend a lot of time with them as I know that you have, is sometimes when you want to change the culture, you just encourage the junk out of people who are doing it correctly instead of having to mid-course correct everyone who's doing it wrong. You just find the one who's doing it right and you go, here, great, look, here's applause, here's focus, here's attention, here's my time. I'm going to ask you questions on how I can do this better. You make them a little bit of the kind of a professor in that moment. And then they go, hey, I would like to be asked those same things. So that's another thing. Yeah. When I'm teaching a sermon, I don't go, for those of you who have brought your Bibles, I'm just going to say, open your Bibles to this. I want you to write this down in the margin of your Bible. On your journal, make sure you do this. And instead of providing that for them week after week, when I provide it for them, I teach them, you can forget it. It's not that big of a deal. When I don't, I've created one where I go, okay, cool. If I don't bring one, then I'm going to be out on this thing. So then I see them taking notes on different stuff or different devices. Or I can just simply say, hey, turn back 2 weeks ago in your journal as to what we were talking about when we first started this book of 1 Samuel. What was the second point that I made that week? And people instinctively, it's that cognitive dissonance where they go, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not bringing my, so when you walk in, it looks like a little bit of a cult because everyone's taking notes. Everyone's got their Bible, everyone, right? Like Mission Vista High School, which is a big high school here in the area, like on there, they made like an Instagram page for the high school and they had like an 11-12 like starter kit So they knew 11-12ers enough because they walked around with their Bibles, they walked around with their 11-12 blanket, they walked around with their journals, and they had these conversations in real time with people. That
Wow.
the public school system was going, you must be an 11-12er because this is how you act and think, and this is what you do, and this is what you bring. And for some people who don't belong anywhere else, it was a really low-hanging bar to go, I can belong there, I can do that, and then the gospel's there for them. So that would be another thing that I think we're pretty stringent on, is using language of, here is what we do here. You're not going to feel embarrassed if you didn't. And I'm going to make it so obvious to you what is expected of you without ever saying, guys, bring your journals, right? Because when you hear that as a high school, you go, forget you, man. Don't tell me what to do. But then when you just say, write this in your journal, write this in your thing, make sure, hey, refer to 2 weeks back. I want you to write this. We're going to actually touch on this next week when we get here. Then people go, I want to be included. So the inclusiveness draws them in, and then there's the gospel for them when they're there.
So, Chris, do you think that the reason this works so well for your ministry is because of that innate desire to belong and to be a part of things? Because, you know, I'm trying to translate this also, like if you work with middle schoolers, and I think I would love to, you know, experiment with some of this, you know, because I am the youth pastor that's like, do you know people are risking their lives to bring Bibles into the country, and you guys won't even walk 12 feet to grab one off the bookshelf? What's wrong with you? Like, that is totally me. And I wonder, like, with a 6th, 7th, 8th grader, like, would they care enough, you know? And so I think that all that to say, like, these principles, like, even though you have very specific ones for your ministry, like what we create, like we have to find that core desire is what I'm saying. And so like you've identified the core desire of your specific group that you're working with is they want to be celebrated. They want to be affirmed. They want biggest fans. They want to be included, a part of things. They want to be I want to say celebritized, but that's not a word.
It is now.
Making a celebrity, like they want to be known, they want to be platformed. So you have found structures to say, here's how I can accomplish that based on your core desires, which works so beautifully, and the growth has reflected that, and the health too. Let's not forget that. Like it just wasn't like, oh cool, like we have a bunch of kids coming, but it was such a healthy, tight-knit group for being as big as it is. And so I guess what I would have to challenge myself and other youth pastors is that, like, what is the core desire of your group? It might not be exactly what the core desire of 11th and 12th graders at Vista, California is. But if you're with high school, I would say that's pretty transferable to upperclassmen for sure.
I would say those grade splits, junior high, high school, young adult, they probably all are fairly lumped together, more or less.
I would think so. And, you know, I think the challenge then is for all of us, like if we're starting at cultural ground zero, and like, what am I wanting to accomplish? Then taking that step back and saying, well, I can only accomplish that by identifying their core desire. And it sounds manipulative, even saying it out loud, but playing to that. You know, playing to what your core desire is. But it's not manipulative if the outcome is you heard the gospel and you're in community and you love people. Like, I mean, it's not some ploy to like, we're going to manipulate and get all your money. You know, it's like, I want you to hear the gospel. So how can I, like Paul says, be all things to all people? How can I meet you where you're at? How can I, you know,
point you in that right direction. You're going to want to go there
and meet your deepest need. You know, like going back to that example of you don't preach the gospel to starving people, you feed them and then preach them the gospel. So, and we rarely come across starving people in Southern California. I mean, even our homeless are pretty well fed, I would say. I went down there to serve the homeless a few years ago. I mean, there was like people with trunkfuls of cars. Anyways, tangent. But I mean, and that's the brilliance there of you knew them enough to identify their core need. And so like you would really have to study your group. You'd really have to know them. You'd really have to be a student of your students to know exactly what angle to come, you know, at them with. And so did you feel like coming in, you had to like undo the culture and then reset, or was there just like lack of culture? And I don't know which one would actually be harder, to undo or to start from ground zero, but where did you feel like you were at?
I feel like there was no culture. Now every group is going to have some kind of a culture to it, but it's going to be a reflection of their strongest leader. And that's the thing. It doesn't always have to be always have to be a pastor. Sometimes you have to identify a student and you have to get them on your same team and go, here's what I want to do. Can you help me accomplish this? And sometimes there's some humility there that goes along with that. Or it's a leader. I've seen some youth groups where the pastor needs to relinquish power to a leader who's of right mind. You go, I need you to help me accomplish these things. But really it was this, there was no, here's who we are, here's who we aren't. And when you have that, you don't have a place where people can belong, because the question is like, belong to what? We just all agreed to meet at the same time, not unlike a concert. Well, even a concert, you're there because you all have this weird vibe with whoever's playing there. But it's like the DMV. You're all there because you either have to be there because someone forced you to be there, or you want to get, stickers for your Yamaha Razor so you can take it out in the desert. But you're not there. You're not seeking community. You're not a people group. You all have a different agenda and everything else like that. So yeah, I think for sure, when you're talking about those core desires, that was something that I reverse engineered looking back on, going, I know them. We met every week, but we met every week because I had nothing else to do. I was a 21-year-old guy who came down, and I was completely I went from where I was in Orange County. I was transplanted down here, and my life was students. So I met every week with them for an hour and 15 minutes. Now it's only a 50-minute thing. But then when someone asked a question of like, what do you want to change? I knew all the answers. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew what would work, what wouldn't work, because I like you said it, I became a student of my students. I got what they wanted, instead of being now a 31-year-old going, hey guys, let's go do this thing. Because they're going to go, no thanks, man. So now it really is powerful to identify people who can become those kind of like cross section of your culture and a petri dish of what it looks like. And then you can work with them. And again, that line between manipulation and strategy, one is kind of the shadow side of the other, but manipulation always kind of promotes meanness. And then strategy is to push them towards a goal. And so strategically, I want to push them towards Christ rather than to draw them towards me. And that can obviously be the tendency of some pastors. But that if our aim is that they would know Christ, then the strategy by which we get there through culture setting and changing, I think is beneficial. And it's something that we need to focus on. And maybe we are afraid of it because we go, well, that sounds manipulative. But at the end of the day, that might be something that's holding us back. That might be a great phrase we use over and over again to overlay our fear that we're scared if we tried it and didn't work, we don't know what we would do with ourselves then. So just kind of giving you however you're listening to this, to say, try it, go for it, go for a culture shift, go for a culture change, whatever capacity that might look like.
Yeah. And I think, with the fear of manipulation, we can feel that weird, like, oh, am I like a used car salesman trying to get ooh, what's going to interest you? But I think when we frame it in the way of all my intentions are good, I just want to feed your starving soul. And I just want to present this in a way that you're going to hear it, And I think that's what we do, is thinking almost of it as translating the gospel into their love language so that they can hear it loud and clear,
That's perfect. That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. So not being afraid of that, but, again, you've done such a good job. And I think, as we kind of wrap it up, I think one of the things kind of left for any of our listeners to think about was something you said a few minutes ago of, there's always a culture. If you are not setting it, then you're just letting it go rogue and develop itself, or you're letting the loudest or biggest leader in the group set that, and it's just kind of developing this life of its own, and it can really, run away from you. I got to a point in our ministry, we had like this huge surge in growth a couple years ago, and the culture did a 180 on me, and it did it so quick, like my head spun, and I didn't even realize what was happening until someone had pushed cultural reset on me. And I didn't even, because when we were smaller, my relationship with the students was enough to set the culture. But then the bigger you get, you're like, I don't have touch points with all of you. And then these kids come in that are not really a part of our church, but we're so glad they're there, but they're leaders and they're influencers and they're popular. And then all of a sudden you're like, how in the world did we get here? And so I think that's one really cautionary tale, to be aware of is, growth in your ministry is a great thing, but it also creates this chasing culture thing where you have to be on top of it, or it will reset under your watch and you won't even realize it happened until you're like, oh my gosh. I remember showing up on Tuesday nights and feeling like I miss. The name of my youth group is called Chaos. I work with middle schoolers, so whatever. I didn't name it. It was already named when I came in. Maybe I should have reset the culture. Probably should have a long time ago. But it was like, I miss the youth group that I used to go to Chaos on Tuesdays. Like now I work at a minimum security prison. I don't know like what just happened. I mean, it was like that bad to where I had to get security in and all this stuff, but because I wasn't on top of it and I didn't realize that growth can actually steal your culture very, very quickly. And so, yeah, I guess that's another like, whoa, signpost of be careful as you grow. Is it running away without your permission, and who's running away with it? Because it's amazing what how students influence each other. And you don't even realize it's happening. I mean, we're not a part of every conversation. We're not a part of every group. We're not a part of every, like things would happen at our youth group that I'd be like, what? I've been here the whole time. How did I not even see that, And it became not a safe place anymore. And we've since gained it back. But I think you're right to, put this emphasis on you like live and die by this culture. And is it a safe place for students to come? Can they hear the gospel? Can they engage? Do they feel safe to be themselves? And like you said, do they feel safe to bring other people and know that their friends who may or may not be churched will be well taken care of? But yeah, we have to stay vigilant for that. So we love what you're doing. You are,
you're a fan favorite.
Yeah.
In case you probably don't get to hear it, but when I'm in the sanctuary and the video, and because we're off an offsite campus, the video comes up and it's Chris Hilken. You hear the murmurs, yes, my favorite. And it's all coming from me, but that's okay too. So if you get comment cards with other people's names, they may all be from me.
It's all from Jeff. Well, you're at northcoastchurch.com because all of our sermons and our devos are posted there. But if people wanted to connect with you outside of northcoastchurch.com, where do you hang out?
What's your phone number?
I'm probably most vigilant about my Instagram. So it's just at Chris Hilken. Nothing special or fancy, just at Chris Hilken. If they have questions or anything else that they need, I'd love to be a resource. And but yeah, that's probably the best place.
Cool. All right.
And we have one sign off.
Oh, yes. I'm so excited. We have a fun question for you. Not that wasn't fun, but
I feel like I haven't even been here the whole time, but whatever.
You're adorable.
I had to push record. So the question is, in an alternate universe where there's another Christopher Hilken, what career path would you have taken or would you take?
Oh, Burt Macklin, FBI. I just feel like I would love to be in the FBI. Wow. There's not a better moment in any movie than when the guy finally reveals that he was a double agent. And oh man, that's just the best part of anything. Like, could you imagine how you would strut around if you had an FBI badge in your pocket, the answer is I can't imagine, and I'd like.
You would just want to like flash it to everybody. Chris Hilken, FBI.
Find reasons to pull it out. That would do anyway.
I imagine you in a trench coat, but now I'm thinking I'm going a little bit more private detective.
Oh, yeah.
But
1950s. Hey, say.
with
your derby hat or whatever they call those things.
I could have sworn you were gonna say something like I thought you were gonna go like football realm or football coach. So Christopher has named not all of his children after football people, but he has a son named Brady after Tom Brady. He has a son named Peyton after Peyton Manning. I know these people. I'm so proud of myself. And so I thought to myself, he's gonna do something like a football coach or an owner of a team, or maybe
that would be my disguise.
Oh, there you go.
I would coach the Indianapolis Colts, but by night, Burt Macklin FBI.
Burt Macklin FBI. I love it. Well, maybe for your like 10th year on staff, we'll make you a little faux badge or something like that.
Don't you tease me.
And then you can live out your dream just a little bit. Oh, cool. Well, thank you so much, Chris. This was so fun. So rich, such good stuff. Yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for checking out this episode. We hope that it provided a ton of insight for you to create health in yourself, your ministry, and your church.
And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the Ministry Coach podcast wherever you're watching or listening. And it would mean so much to us if you would rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts.
And we'd also encourage you to share it with a friend so that it can go to help more people. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.